there's always trade-offs, and I think that's the way that you have to really think about your career and your choices that you make, is what are the trade-offs that you're making. So that sort of guides you. And then actually Google are really amazing because they also online, there's lots of resources available for candidates. I think first of all, it's very normal to feel that way, and you'll be amazed at the amount of people that feel that way, but they'll never say it. They'll never say it because ego gets in the way. They'll never say it because they'll think, well, if I admit this, then what are people going to think of me? People are going to think that I'm a lesser leader. I would say if you start speaking to every recruiter that reaches out to you, you're probably going to end up having a lot of conversations and times that are just a waste of time.
Welcome to the Channel Chat podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Channel Chat podcast. Today I am joined by, how do I introduce you, industry legend Ghazal Asif, who's the head of channel partners and director at Google Customer Solutions. Ghazal, how are you? You well?
I am doing fabulous. I'm not quite sure if I'm a legend just yet, but I'm definitely we're definitely working towards it. It's still progress.
Yeah, there we go. I was checking before the podcast. You were our 15th episode back in, I think it was 2019. It feels like a long time ago. A lot's happened since, hasn't it?
Oh my gosh, wait, did we have a life before the pandemic? Was this before the pandemic when I came to the studio and when we met in person? Wow, that was, it's funny, you say it's 2019, which actually, like in the grand scheme of life, as it wasn't that long ago, but it feels like it was a lifetime ago.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think we're about 115 now, so you're about 100 episodes on, which is impressive. And yeah, it's come a long way, but really, really appreciate you obviously joining us again. And a lot's happened in your life since we last spoke. Last time you were with Cybereason, and maybe we can just kick off and understand kind of what happened there and why did you move on?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, you're right. A lot's happened since we last spoke. I also got engaged a few months ago as well.
Congratulations!
Thank you. So the two changes, obviously my engagement, but then me leaving Cybereason and joining Google. And it's interesting because, as I was reflecting on coming and talking to you, I was thinking that over the last decade, all the roles that I've had, I haven't applied for them. I have usually been either tapped on the shoulder or headhunted. And this was the same. I was pretty happy at Cybereason. Like with all pre-IPO companies, there's a lot of challenges. You're solving the problem of competing with partners and customers' budgets, not necessarily being an industry known name, so not necessarily being able to get the time, having to spend more time and energy differentiating yourself, especially within cybersecurity, from everyone else. So, a lot of challenges and problems, but also that's what you sign up for when you join a pre-IPO. And then a executive recruiter from Google reached out to me, and I'm going to be totally straight up. I never aspired to work for Google, right? I kind of pride myself as being the pre-IPO startup. I ended up at Cisco for a while through the acquisitions, but never really thought Google's going to be the place for me just because of how big it is. But the role that the recruiter positioned to me, and frankly, when you get an executive recruiter reach out to you from like Google or Amazon or Microsoft, you take the call, right? you take the call. And that's where it started off. They reached out to me. I explored the role. I thought it seemed quite interesting. It was very difficult because I had a huge amount of equity in Cybereason. And then, the trade-off is, do I give up the equity at Cybereason, of the possibility of, taking a company IPO, huge personal ambition of mine, plus the potential wealth creation for the sort of more safer guaranteed path. And ultimately, I thought I have an opportunity to build a multi-billion-dollar business within Google that could give me size, scale, impact, which is something that excites me. And I ultimately took the role at Google. But it was a very difficult decision, I have to say.
Yeah, really interesting insight there on the view of Google, and then obviously having those conversations. And I think there's a little lesson there for people that are ruling opportunities out, or maybe have kind of prerequisite thoughts, because once you have those conversations, your mind can obviously be changed. But going back to kind of Cybereason, because I think if you look at the majority of people in the channel, they're probably sitting either in a SME, which is growing kind of steadily, or then a larger corporate like you obviously at the moment. What's the challenges of working for a kind of pre-IP company and a company going through such hyper growth? It must be so challenging.
It really is. I think first of all, you have to accept that no matter where you are in your career, you'll always have some challenges, and those challenges lead to some level of growth. So I think being at the edge of your comfort zone is always really important, because the edge of your comfort zone is where growth happens. And I've always been a believer in that. The question is really, what kind of challenges and what kind of problems do you want to be solving? Are the ones that get you excited and make you feel like you're making a difference, or are the ones that you're like, oh, my role sucks? For cyber reason, I was in gen, and I think this is the same for most hyperscale, high growth, so pre-IPO companies. The challenges are one of, first of all, your day is chaotic because startups tend to be quite fluid, and have the ability to change to customer and market needs. You might start off a quarter thinking this is my plan, and then actually product make a decision that takes the plan and throws it out the window. So in cyber reason, I found that we were able to react to changes really quickly, but what that meant was we had to be very flexible in our approach. I remember changing the partners that I wanted to work with based on the product and what the product needs and priorities were multiple times. I think that's a good thing. I think if you're someone that thrives in an environment that can change very fast and rapidly, and you can react to those changes without being like, oh, I spent so much time building this plan and now it's not really relevant anymore. Like, startups are an amazing place for that. I also think that there's a hustle that exists within a startup, because you're aware that every single day you're burning through cash. Yeah. So there's like a chase that comes with that. There's a chase that comes with every deal. Every deal is important. There's a chase that comes with the first time you go and win a partner, and the partners are going to work with you versus your competitor. There's a chase, there's a thrill that comes with that doesn't necessarily exist with big corporates. Like, if I have a partner decide to work or not work at Google, it's not going to make or break Google. It might be a great win for me or my team or not, but it's not going to make or break Google. At cyber reason, like, every win matters, right? So there's like a pride, there's a chase, and there's a hustle that I think is great for, if that's what you're looking for at that point in your career. And frankly, I think that if you're looking for exposure to different parts of the business, startup is a really great place to be. For example, within cyber reason, I was very involved with the CFO of understanding, like, where should we be making investments and what the trade-offs are. I was also very involved with product and understanding how do we grow a certain segment of the channel partners. At that point, it was like service providers. We were looking at what products are needed for that service provider segment to succeed. And you have fairly high level of sort of influence over other parts of the business. When you move to a big corporate, you really need to be a specialist in what you're doing, and go deep within that specialist skills. And you have like a little less, like, I can't call Google CFO Ruth and be like, hey Ruth, I've come across this idea, how do you think about it, right? I was very close to our CEO, amazing CEO called Lior. Lior and I connected multiple times in any given month or any given quarter, understanding from him. He was also the founder and CEO of the company. What are some of his challenges? Getting Lior in front of customers and partners, they would be blown away because he's just so brilliant in the way that he thinks. I can't call Sundar, our Google CEO, and be like, hey Sundar, I have a partner and I think you'd really be able to add a lot of value. Exactly. You might have other things to think about, but my honest and my advice and guidance is everyone should do the startup gig at least once in their career. Either you'll learn that you can thrive in that environment, and you can learn a ton, or you might realize that actually you need a little bit more structure. You want to trade off the potential upside that comes from being in a startup in terms of making money and wealth creation to having some level of security. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just ultimately sort of what works for you and where you're at in your career.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Because if you were leaving, let's say, university and you went straight into a startup, it might just be a complete mess around you. And it might be so difficult for you actually to fathom what's going on. Maybe a couple of years in a corporate where it's much more structured, and then going into that world, you might be a bit more prepared for it. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because I suppose there's pros and cons of both.
There's always trade-offs, and I think that's the way that you have to really think about your career and your choices that you make, is what are the trade-offs that you're making. So for example, leaving Cybereason and joining Google, I went from being someone that was very involved in the company's sort of strategic direction as a senior vice president, to now being in Google, where I'm very involved in the strategic direction for my team, but not necessarily, I'm not in charge of 100,000 plus company and the direction of that. So you have to be very honest with yourself on the decisions that you're making, the trade-offs that you're making, and just own them. And I think if you own, look, these are my trade-offs, here's why I'm making them, I understand my reasons for making them, they make sense for me for the next, let's say, few years of my life. And the good news with most decisions is, you want to make them and then sort of see them through, but you're not tied to it for the rest of your life, but make the decision for the next, let's say, 5 years. And I think if you're conscious and deliberate about that, you'll generally be okay.
Yeah, and you touched on there when you mentioned about weighing up whether to move to Google, because you have stocks and shares involved with Cybereason. And we see a lot in the market now that a lot of particular kind of SDRs or AEs are enticed to the business with this opportunity. Do you think it is a good opportunity for someone at that level? Do you think they're going to really benefit from it? Or do you think it's a little bit of a way to entice talent, but the view of them probably moving on in 2 or 3 years anyway? It must be quite difficult to weigh that up, especially when you're a bit more junior.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Do you want the honest answer or the text?
I want the honest answer, always.
All right, okay. So look, first of all, when you're assessing equity, it's very easy for a company to say, you're getting this many shares, and theoretically, if the company goes public, each share is going to be worth blah. And then you're like, ooh, I can make a lot of money. It's not that simple. So, maybe I can send you, I came across this amazing calculator that helps you work out roughly what the shares could mean to you in terms of money that you take home. And I used that as my calculator to work out the equity that I had in Cybereason. But ultimately, I think when you're much earlier in your career, there is acceptance that you're not going to have that many shares in a company, even though the value on paper might seem like a lot. Really, you're at the bottom end of the distribution of those shares. And the theoretical, like what the company can go public for, it is totally theoretical. You're not even taking into consideration things like dilution if the company raises more money. So you have to be very realistic. If you're going in at, let's say, your first or second role in a startup, don't let the reason be you're going to make a ton of money. You're not. The money starts changing in the senior leadership rank. So if you're joining as a people leader and then above, and then the closer you get to the C-suite, the more money you're going to make. It's sort of that simple. If you are entry level, early in career, do the startup for other reasons. You are going to get a ton of exposure to all of the business. You are going to be able to sort of roll up your sleeves and have a level of hustle that when you put that into your CV, you can own that. That's going to be what you created. You don't have a brand like Google behind you when you're making cold calls or when you're trying to win that deal or close that partnership. You can own that. There's a lot of benefit, but don't let wealth creation be the driving factor, not that early in your career, because you're going to likely be pretty disappointed.
Yeah.
I'll send you the calculator. You can distribute that on your network.
So everyone can see that. Is there a driving factor you think they should perhaps look out for, whether that be where the business is at, maybe the technology, the market they're in? Is there any particular areas you think they should really look out for?
I think there's a few. I think you have to sort of find the sweet spot between an environment where you can really learn, develop, and grow, and a company that heavily invests in you, with opportunity that is huge in the market. If you look at sort of software, SaaS companies, I know sort of lots of people that went to Snowflake did incredibly well. Then you've got pre-IPO startups like ThoughtSpot as an example, which I've no doubt are also going to really well. And I think first step is to understand, like, what are the indicators that this company is really developing its people. I think when you're early in your career, the learning and development you receive is going to be critical with the way that the rest of your career shapes up. And one very easy way of doing that is literally to do some networking. You know, if you are thinking about going to a company, see if you can connect with other people that are in that company and just have the open, honest question. Hey, I'm considering joining. Tell me a little bit about what is the learning and development that you've received. When you're going through interviews, ask the question, how do you develop skills within your people? I'm pretty new in my career. What does the career opportunity look for me? But really push the recruiters, the hiring managers, what learning and development is available for you. I think that's one. Secondly, is if you look at the sort of industry that you're going in, does it have a huge TAM? Who are the other competitors within that industry? If you've got, you know, a high TAM, very strong competition, then what is the product differentiation, the go-to-market differentiation of the company that you're joining? Have a look at their founding team. Have a look at their existing management team. Are there people on that team that have done this before? If they've done it before, then you know that in general, they sort of understand the ups and downs of startups and you're in really good hands. If you can sort of find that sweet spot between a company that is investing in their people, learning and development, plus is also onto something. So like, for example, a company like DataRobot comes to mind. I know loads of people that I work with App Dynamics that have gone to DataRobot, huge space, AI only growing, tens of billions of dollars of addressable market, no real dominant player in that market. You know, founding team are mostly ex-App Dynamics that were acquired by Cisco, the president, the CRO, most of the senior leadership. You know, so then you start looking at an opportunity like that and you think, okay, you know what, they stand a really good chance of having a great exit. And if you ask their teams, do you invest and develop their people? Like, I can tell you, knowing that team really well, that they do. You know, so if you're wondering, you know, is there a good opportunity out there? I think DataRobot is expanding. I didn't get paid to say this. It's an amazing team and a really great career opportunity.
Yeah, excellent. I think there's a lot of hints and tips there, and a lot of homework for people to do considering joining businesses, which I think a lot of people can fall short of. So that's brilliant. So let's jump to your time at Google. So you're approached by the recruitment team there. What did the interview process look like for that after that stage? Because I think senior leadership in Google, what kind of process are you going through? It must have been quite intense.
Oh my gosh, it was really, at one point I had to say to them, by the way, you know, you approached me and not the other way around, right? I feel like I'm working really hard here to sell myself, but you approached me and not the other way around. So a couple of sort of things that stand out. First of all, it felt like a very long process. It was 3 to 4 months between the recruiter reaching out and then me sort of eventually signing and getting the contract. In the world of Google, that's very average for senior leadership roles. It's like not that fast, but it's also not slow. Sometimes it takes much longer. Interestingly, I was told by the recruiter I was the very first person they contacted for the role. So it's very rare that the very first person that you sort of reach out to is the person that ends up getting the job. In terms of process, Google is very structured. One of the most fascinating things about Google's hiring process is that the hiring manager ultimately doesn't make the call on who gets the job. And that's designed to try and weed out biases. So the way that it works is, and this is, I think, consistent with most roles at Google, you have a committee of people that interview you for different dimensions. And when we say dimensions, you can look at these as almost like competencies. So one thing that they will interview you for is something that we call RRK, which is role-related knowledge. So you've got one designated person. For all the candidates, they will dig deep on, can this person do the job? Do they have the role-related knowledge to do this job? Then one person will be the designated person to interview for example, leadership. Can this person lead themselves and teams through ambiguity and changing environments? Because things, believe it or not, at Google do still change quite a bit. Then you'll have someone rating around Googliness. Does this person think about diversity and inclusion? How does this person show up in difficult times and circumstances? Is it someone that is hungry to continuously listen and learn? So you'll have different people that are interviewing for these different, we call them dimensions. They will then ultimately give their recommendation, and they'll put their recommendation in this tool with all their notes. Like, you need to put in all your notes along with, I've rated this person on this dimension, here's my notes, and I'm leaning towards hiring, not hiring. And there's like 4 different grades that you can give on strong hire, leaning no hire, a strong no hire, or leaning no hire. That then all gets put into something called a packet. That packet then goes to a hiring committee, And the hiring committee are people that are not within the people that have done the interviews. And you remove all gender neutral language. You remove anything that could give indication of who this person is. Ethnic, name, everything, all of that's removed. Your name's removed, so you don't know ethnic background, gender, it's all gender neutral language. The really nice thing with that is that although there's never a perfect formula when it comes to hiring, it does try and address this problem of you're more or less likely to get a job if you're male or female. You're more or less likely to get a job depending on whether you have an ethnic sounding name or a Caucasian sounding name. So it weeds all that out. And so as a hiring manager, you can give your recommendation, as can the other interviewees in the panel. But ultimately, the hiring committee that reviews the packet, they're the ones that decide. So you can put someone forward and they'll then decide, is the evidence that this is the right person for the role, is that evidence there based on the strength of the packet? So fascinating. And so I found it somewhat, when I was going through the process, I found it a little frustrating because I'd walk away from each interview and I would think, oh, that was a good interview. I met with the person who was my boss, and he it's funny, like the day that I got told that I was getting offered the role was also the day that I found out my boss was resigning. So it was a little frustrating, knowing that, the person that you've interviewed is going to be your boss is no longer going to be your boss. But then, when I interviewed with him, I was like, I could see myself working for this person. He seems really great. I know that we had a great conversation. I felt the chemistry both ways. There was amazing rapport. But then it's a realization, but he doesn't get to make the call, right? Like it's you kind of walk away feeling like, but if it was most other companies, he would make the call, and I'd be like, yay.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm going to get an offer here. But in a way, it sort of equalizes everyone. And you feel like it's a very fair process with the structure around it, which I think is great. And by the way, I did so much prep. I think last time I spoke about the amount of prep that you should do for an interview. Even when you get headhunted, the prep is still exactly the same. Like I did a ton of research and reading into Google overall, Google's mission, the various different product groups within Google, business units, this team, what do I know about the people that are on this team, a lot of fact finding. So I think that's one thing that you assume that might change over time as you become more senior in your career. Even if you get headhunted for a role, you might think people go out and have a little coffee and, and over drinks decide that let's have a handshake and let's work together. No, the prep remains the same. Has to be there.
Of course. Now you're in Google, you're aware of this kind of scoring system, but could you feel in the interviews they were leaning towards that dimension, or they're really trying to push me on this? Could you feel that, or are you completely kind of blind to it at the time?
The recruiting team tells you. The recruiting team tells you just to allow you to prepare. Your leadership is going to be assessed, or your interview is going to be assessed on leadership. This person is going to be interviewing you based on RRK. So that gives you an indication on like the type of prep that you need to do, which is a good thing. Otherwise, going in blind, I think you're set up to fail, because they could be assessing you in any dimension and you'd have no idea. So that sort of guides you. And then actually Google are really amazing, because they also online, there's lots of resources available for candidates, where they even go as far as saying, here's how you should look to structure your response. Use the STAR technique that talks you through the situation. What's the rest of it? This is terrible. I can't remember now. But the STAR is an acronym for how you should structure your responses. So I really love that about the process, where you don't feel like you're being set up to fail in an interview. You feel like there's so many resources that Google's trying to root for you in the background and being like, if you're a great candidate and if you're a great fit for this role, we want to make sure we're setting up you in the interview process for success. And I think that's something that I really found a lot of respect for in the process. Even though it's stressful and there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of transparency, and this is how the process is run, and a lot of resources available online.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because I think, like you said, so many are set up to fail, but if they're giving you the material, it's going to be very rare in a real business situation where you're going in completely blind. So you should be able to do the research. That's going to affect the work, isn't it?
Exactly. And imagine you are the best candidate for a role, but you know what, like the nerves get the better of you that day, the day of your interview. You know, it's a little unfair. So I think the fact that they give you all the resources, they tell you like, here's ideally how to structure your responses, even to the extent that you know, if you go online, you Google interviews from Google themselves and the recruiting team, they have got examples of, here's a question and here's how we would look to answer it. And that sort of really helps you prepare and think about how you can show up with not just the prep that you've done, but how are you going to respond to many questions. And since Google's such a big company at this point, in a lot of these forums, there's anonymized people that show up with the actual questions are asked as well. So I think in a way, everything being online makes it much easier to interview for big companies like Google, Amazon, Micro. You can find out literally for any role what the interview questions are going to be. But then you also have to assume that other people have done the same level of prep. So you have to.
Come with that.
Exactly.
That's nice. A good transparency of interview process. It's quite rare, so it's good to see. So recruiter contacts you, 4 months later you accept the job, notice period, and then you start a job in a pandemic.
Oh my gosh, it's been so hard, Mark, so hard. I think that nothing could have prepared me for the amount of difficulty and I think challenge when you're not seeing people face to face. So, I mean, I joined as a new senior leader at Google. I'm not from advertising. I'm from a very different background. The team that I have the immense honor and pleasure of leading and been through a bunch of change pre-me joining. And there's something really nice about joining a team and sort of meeting everyone in person, go grabbing a coffee just to get to know each other. Hey, this is me. Here's how I work. Here's how I think about the business. Tell me about you. What are some of your challenges? When you have to do that all behind a screen, I almost forgot how difficult it is to create that connection. You know, and frankly, how much I realized, I mean, I've always known I'm an extrovert, but I realized how much energy I get from just being in the office, being with people. And Google, as you know, is famous for, you know, these gorgeous offices that are loaded with tons of perks, slides coming down, loads of snacks, amazing lunch, gym. You know, I missed out on all of that, and it was almost like Google without all the bells and whistles, which is a lot of people, big company, and a ton to learn. So my first 6 months were probably the most difficult transition I've ever had to make in my career.
Okay. And have you been on the slide yet?
I haven't been on the slide yet. No, I haven't seen the slide in the Google London office, although I think there is one in the Dublin office. So I'm going to go and visit there.
No, just for that. That's cool. So what's the hardest part? Is it kind of ingrained into a new team? Is it the leadership aspect, or what do you think is the toughest part of being kind of stuck behind that screen, not being around people?
Couple of things. First, it's the learning, right? So let's suppose we are together and I'm saying to you, hey, listen, I don't understand this ads product, ultimately what the user journey looks like with this ads product. If we're in a normal office environment, instead of trying to explain it to me verbally, you'd be like, hold on a second, Ghazal, let me just put this on a whiteboard. And then you'd walk through it and you'd jot it out on a whiteboard. Here's the user journey. Here's what the UX UI flow looks like. And then I could then dive deeper. Okay, with this UX UI flow, I don't understand this, or you know, I don't understand how the integration works between this point to that point. And you know, that face-to-face just ability to get on a whiteboard, draw and map things out, really helps accelerate your learning. Because you know, you're able to sort of draw it with the visual aid, simplify it, especially for someone like me that's new to the industry. Most of my learning is dependent on going online and looking at various, you know, modules that are created for learning, and there's hardly any interaction back and forth. It's like that classroom environment, and I just have learned actually that that's not the best way for me to learn. I learn much better when I'm having a conversation through the experiential learning. So I think the learning curve became steeper as a result of me being remote. That's one. Related to learning, Google did this amazing study, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but your ability to learn when you're not face to face it significantly decreases, because when you're in a face-to-face environment, especially at Google, you bump into someone and they tell you, hey, listen, I was in this other meeting, they were talking about X. That person's like, oh yeah, I was having a similar meeting and we were talking about this. Let's catch up. Let's think, yeah, I've got some time later let's sync up over coffee and discuss that. So idea sharing and learning through connecting with different people and connecting through idea sharing, that becomes really difficult. Now all meetings that I have with people are calendarized, they're in the schedule. It's that organic meeting people, having that water cooler chat, that information sharing that happens as a result of that kind of organic environment. That is totally not there in this remote setting. I'd say they're the two that are the biggest. And the other thing is that when I request time, or when someone requests time with me, like there needs to be a reason for it. Like our calendars are so full. It's like, what's the objective? Is this a priority? But if you bump into someone in the corridor or going from one part of Google's building to another, and they're like, hey, listen, I heard that you're doing this great work. Have you got time? Let me walk with you to the next meeting and let's just have a quick introductory. All of that is gone. So I think that we, the people that have joined new companies remotely, Google or otherwise, have a much steeper learning curve. And one of our VPs actually put it really, really well. When we go back to a normal environment, it's like we'll have gone from being on a mountain on this high altitude, wearing a mask where it's really difficult, and we'll come down below, we'll take the mask off, we'll be like, oh wow, this is so much easier.
Have you managed to meet your team now then? Are you kind of ingrained now properly, or what's the last kind of 6 months really look like?
I've met some of the team twice. So the people that are based in London, I have had the immense pleasure of meeting them 2 times in person. But most of the rest of the teams, so we've got folks based in Paris, we've got folks based in Hamburg. I haven't met them face to face yet. We are planning before the end of the year, now that there's some travel restrictions that are lifted, to see if we can get everyone together. I think that would be a huge win if we can get everyone together in person to do some form of offsite. But it's all dependent on each country and their level of restrictions and our ability to travel, etc. So we are optimistic, we're cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to meet people in person.
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. And you mentioned a couple of times already, you've jumped into, I don't want to say a whole new industry, because you're still in technology, but it's a completely different world to what you've been in before. Could you just talk us through your current role and that transition? And did you kind of question yourself on whether you can move in such a different direction to what you've been already?
Yeah. So I didn't anticipate the transition would have been as difficult as it has been, because when I look at my career, if you just look at the technology stack, I've jumped different places of the technology stack. I went from, hardware, networking, cloud managed networking to, for example, application performance management. And so I thought, if I can make that transition, still within tech, it's just about rolling your sleeves up and learning. As long as I'm committed to that learning, can't be that hard. But with the combination of the pandemic, it is a very different industry. Google has its own language and a lot of acronyms that you don't even realize are a thing. It has been fairly difficult. And I think that, if I was to go back a year now, I've been at Google for a year, and give myself some advice, is just the sort of expectation that, hey, listen, like the learning curve is going to be steep, and just embrace it. Don't let it freak you out. Because a few times in my first 6 months, I got freaked out. I was like, what are people talking about? And then you have the classic imposter syndrome that comes up, being like, and the thing is, Google hires such incredibly smart people. Like everyone around the table is incredibly smart, very accomplished, have been to amazing schools, business schools, been to Ivy League universities. And so you're sitting there thinking, I am completely incapable. Like, why am I even here? And you have to sort of catch yourself and remind yourself that you're here because you can do the job, and you're going through a very steep learning curve. And there's like a comfort in knowing that I'm okay with that. And I was very lucky that, I had some amazing support from colleagues and peers at Google, where I could just ping them and be like, hey, listen, like, how do I don't understand this. Help me understand this acronym. Like, what does this mean? I understand this program. Help me understand this program. Like, walk me through it. Give me like imagine you're speaking to a 6-year-old, like walk me through what all of that means. And I think that helped a lot. But to go back to your question on what does my role look like? So I work in a part of Google that acquires and grows small to medium-sized advertisers, and Google's word medium is still quite big, and it's based on the dollar spend, so still fairly big advertisers. This part of Google's business is called GCS, and it rolls up under a much bigger org called GBO. And GBO is essentially the sales advertising arm of Google, the core part of the business, the biggest and core part of the business, which benefited hugely from the pandemic. That's split up into GCS and LCS. LCS is large customer solutions, and then so GCS is the small to medium businesses. Within that, there is a partnerships team, which is a team that I run, and we work with platforms like, for example, like Shopify, technology platforms that already are working with small to medium businesses on understanding how can we do an integration with them so that our future Google customers can then go into the interface that they're already using. So Shopify's interface, set up a Google Ads account, and ultimately either increase their presence or reach online via the platform. So it's like creating partnerships, technology partnerships, and integrations to then acquire and grow Google advertisers. And it's a really great model, one that I find super fascinating. I think I underestimated probably that when you have a traditional channel, which is the sort of channel that you and I are used to, so you've got VARs and resellers, that world doesn't completely translate into, you know, ads. And the advertising partnership ecosystem looks sort of different. So when I made the decision to come here, I thought, yes, it's a different industry, but the fundamentals are going to be the same. You know, you need to try and find partners that align very well to what you're trying to take to market and enable them to create some joint value to take it to market. But actually those fundamentals don't totally translate. So that for me has been, you know, I guess a humbling experience, because you almost have to unlearn what you know and then say, look, some of what I know might be relevant, but for now I have to sort of unlearn it and look at this through the lens of the industry that I'm in, where, you know, the partner that I work with is not a reseller, it's an advertising agency. What does a resale motion look like within an advertising agency?
Yeah, there's some words there that really resonated with me there. You mentioned kind of imposter syndrome. You mentioned that you obviously were quite humbled by joining this role. And when I think of you, I think incredibly confident, extrovert, and I think a lot of people wouldn't think you'd ever feel like that. And it's nice that people can hear that you felt like that when they've probably been in that situation themselves. And I appreciate you obviously sharing that with us. But what advice would you give to people that do feel like that? Because I think everyone goes for a stage in their career at some point where you kind of go, oh, I'm at my depth here.
Yeah, totally. I think, first of all, it's very normal to feel that way, and you'll be amazed at the amount of people that feel that way, but they'll never say it. They'll never say it because ego gets in the way. You know, they'll never say it because they'll think, well, if I admit this, then, you know, what are people going to think of me? Are people going to think that I'm a lesser leader? And I think what I'm learning over time is that people can relate to vulnerability more so than someone who is this overconfident, like, you know, I'm never scared, I'm totally fearless. Actually, there's something really nice, exactly like what you just said right now, and you're so spot on. And someone that you believe is, you know, great and an expert in their field, being able to just own and say, at points I felt imposter syndrome, at points I felt really lost, because at the end of the day, I'm a human being. You know, I am a human being like everyone else. So a few things that I've always done in my career in the moments where I feel like I have imposter syndrome, and I felt this multiple times over my career, and I think it's more pronounced in general for women, although everyone feels it. And it's, first of all, to keep a list of all the sort of times in your life and your career where you've made an impact. And you know, your CV and your resume ultimately becomes like the summarized version of it. But you know, every year, and I stopped doing this, but I did it for many years, just like a note or a journal of all your key accomplishments that you did in either a quarter or a year. And that will help you put into perspective that you're driving change, you're driving impact, and you're sort of giving yourself a little pat on the back on the small wins, because it's very easy to forget that when you're feeling imposter syndrome. It's just this emotion overcomes you, and you need to sort of fight that emotion with some sense of rationale and logic. And the way to do that is to sort of look back at something and say, actually, I've accomplished so much, you know, and that sort of gives you the perspective that you need. I think the second thing is to find a way to articulate in your own head what is causing that imposter syndrome. Because if you can find out why you're feeling that way, and sort of isolate that to like one or two specific gaps that you see within your learning and development, you can address those. So for me, the times when I have felt that way is specifically when I've not been able to get into understanding a Google product or the way that that product works. So when I realize and understand that, I can then go away and do some research. Okay, you know, here's this is specifically pinpoint. Here's what I don't understand about this. I don't understand the way the API works in this product. Okay, who is the API expert that can go and explain this to me? But when you have this overwhelming fear, like you're not good enough or that you're totally over your skis, there's nothing you can do with that, you know, unless you try and be rational and pinpoint what is it this. And usually it's something. Usually it's either a person that makes you feel that way. Usually it's a meeting, an environment, a topic, a specific product. It'll be something that causes that, and usually it'll be a pattern. So try and pinpoint what that is. And usually the way to overcome it is to go and try and address that gap. Usually it's a gap in knowledge and understanding. And if it's not a gap in knowledge and understanding, and it's just a trigger based on either a person or a meeting or an environment, then try and talk to someone about it. Hey, listen, in this meeting, I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. You know, I just need a soundboard to walk through what's happening. And you'll be amazed at, you know, how the other person will be like, no, like no, you come across really well. Yeah. You know, actually that's all in your head. You know, so to find a confidant and someone that you trust, that you can have that very open, honest, real conversation with, and that tends to help a ton as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's I don't think we're necessarily supportive enough, especially for new people coming to a business, especially because we had Pip White on last week and it will release in a couple of weeks, but she mentioned that she came back from maternity leave and she was speaking about Fireman Sam and Bob the Builder for the last 2 years, then going into a conference and being confident. I was thinking, I can't even comprehend how difficult that must be. So I think generally we need to be more supportive, don't we? And we need to be better at kind of looking out for those signs and thinking, oh, I was there 2 years ago. What can I do for this person? Rather than being tunnel visioned their own little world.
So true. I love Pip White, and I'm sure she also spoke about her journey in Google Cloud and how she decided to take a different direction in her career. I think we can all learn a ton from that as well. She's incredible human and an amazing leader.
Excellent. So you go into this new team at Google, you've got to learn a whole new industry, you're going into a whole new role, and you've also got a team to manage, which is a challenge in itself. So
while not being able to meet anyone in person.
You can't meet anyone either. When you look at that team, you look at your existing team, you see the kind of strengths and weaknesses. Have you got kind of metrics on how, I don't want to say judge, but you kind of review these people and their capabilities, or do you go much more of kind of gut feeling? How do you do that?
So I think when it comes to reviewing talent on the team, you have to move away from your gut feeling, because gut feeling is the root of many biases. And you know, you might have a great feeling about someone because you have a great connection with them. Just because you have a great connection with someone because you go play football together and you like the same football team, or you know, someone's a massive foodie and you think that the Italian restaurant that they eat at and the Italian restaurant that you'd pick as the top pick are exactly the same, doesn't say anything to do with their ability to do the job. So I think in general, as leaders, we sometimes over rely on our gut feeling. When I'm with this person, you know, we have a great connection and get on really well with them, go to the pub, have some drinks together, you know, they're so energetic just like me. And generally that's human nature. You gravitate to people that are just like you. You know, you've got values in common, hobbies in common, you know, kids' schools in common, and generally speaking, you know, in psychology, they're the people that you're most likely to have great relationships with. I think when it comes to work and assessing people and their competency and ability to do the job, all of that has to go out the window. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you end up creating teams of people that look and think the same way. And that is, I would say, that is the way, if you want to create a team that is not diverse and inclusive and isn't sort of generating ideas, that's the way to do it. Go and find a team of people that think exactly the same way. So if you want to encourage an environment of innovation, of challenging ideas, of having that debate, of making sure you're having that debate in the spirit of doing the right thing for your customers and partners, you have to assess people based on their competence and their ability to do the job. So the way that we've done it in my team is that me and the senior leaders within the team that report up to me, we assess people based on their potential and then their performance. It's literally a 2x2 matrix. You could have somebody that is a super high performer, but actually they have almost sort of reached I wouldn't want to say ceiling, because I don't want to put a sort of limit on people's potential, but they've almost sort of reached their potential within that role. And you're like, well, this person's a super performer, but can they ultimately have my job? Like, can they have my job? Can they have the job above me? No, they're not. No, they haven't. So, but they're amazing performers in their job. Then you've got people that are like, this person is a good performer, but they have got an amazing amount of potential. So we sort of assess people based on performance and potential, create a quick 2x2 matrix. Where does the team sit? Where are the gaps that we have? We might have people that have super high, amazing performers, but really they can't have someone on my team, their job or my job. Then we need to bring in more talented people. Excuse me, that have the upside and potential. And I think what that then does is sort of gives you a realistic sort of picture of your team based on performance and potential, and then allows you to think about, who are the people that we almost want to overinvest in. If you've got someone who's a high performer and has a ton of potential, and that there's 4 of those people in your team, you almost want to overinvest in them by giving them more project, by giving them more interesting, exciting work, by giving them opportunities to raise their visibility. And I think when a leader is first new in the business, you have probably 6 months to do that assessment very objectively, because I don't have relationships with anybody. So I can sort of hold people to a very objective standard, and hold myself to an objective standard. And it's that window of time where you want to do that assessment quickly. And there may be people that are low performance and also low potential. You want to make sure you sort of address those concerns as well, so that you can sort of uplift and up-level the rest of the team.
Excellent. Right, so I want to end this with some quick fire questions so you can offer some guidance to the people that are out there. So we'll jump straight in. So you've obviously been in partnership and relationship managing roles for a long time. What's the key kind of few points to managing a good customer or a good relationship with someone you're dealing with?
You've got to be able to articulate the value, and the way to articulate the value, I learned this in App Dynamics, is trying to articulate and then document the 3 whys. So in any customer partner relationship, why would that customer or partner do anything differently to what they're doing today? Like, why would they want to change anything? And this is specific to what you're trying to position or sell. Second thing is, why would they want to do it with you? So, okay, so if there's a customer, that they have to buy a product or service or solution, that they need to do it, but why would they do it with you? What makes your product, service, or solution that great or that different that they would want to do it with you? And thirdly of all, if you answer the first 2, why would they want to do it now? Why not 2 years from now? If you can articulate the 3 whys, jot them down on paper, use them as a way to sort of anchor yourself and then your conversations with the customer, you'll be amazed at how much you'll realize that there's value that's there and you can articulate it, or value that's simply not there. So they're a really great starting point.
Excellent. And obviously with the businesses you've been with, you've been around some incredible talented people. How have you utilised their skill sets to learn off them or gain from their knowledge and experience?
I think that you should, in every career, have the mindset of being a student, that you can learn something from everyone, whether it is someone that's just started brand new, first job in their career, or someone who's, senior leader, C-level for years and years. And I think if you are okay with saying, hey, listen, I don't know the answer to this question, help me. And you can have that level of humility, that drive and hunger to learn. You can always learn from anyone that's around the table, but it all starts with your own mindset first.
Brilliant. And what have you learned about yourself during the pandemic, either professionally or personally?
Professionally, I've learned that actually, you know, in an environment where you're meeting face to face, I get so much energy from people in that face to face environment. And I didn't realize like how much energy people really gave to me in my day to day. I almost sort of took it for granted. Personally, I learned that I'm actually a pretty good cook because I've been doing a lot more
Really?
cooking in the pandemic than I used to.
What's your best dish?
So I cooked an Iranian dish that I'm doing pretty regularly now, called zarish pulao, and it's like a chicken stew with barberries and rice, and it's really delicious. And initially you're like, this looks really hard to make, but I've done it a few times now, and I think
We'll have to get the recipe off you, and we'll have to share it on the list.
Done.
Right, last two questions, touching on people finding jobs and looking at vacancies. The job market is obviously at an all-time high. Everyone's recruiting, particularly in this technology world. There's a distinct lack of talent. For the people that are out there that are happy in roles, should they be exploring conversations with businesses out there, even if they aren't looking? Because you've obviously had that experience yourself with Google.
Yeah, I would say if you start speaking to every recruiter that reaches out to you, you're probably going to end up having a lot of conversations and times that are just a waste of time. I would set yourself and write down criteria in which you would leave your current role. Things like, you know, a position that gives you more scope, could be more money, could be opportunity to take a company IPO, could be to work with an amazing leader that you've admired, and write down what those objective criteria are that would make you look for a role. And then when a recruiter contacts you, only speak to them if you can quickly fact find from them and see if there's any of those criteria that they would meet. Otherwise, I think you end up getting in this place of lots of conversations. You end up confusing yourself, confusing the recruiter, and wasting a ton of time. But if you're very clear on sort of your objective criteria, you can be upfront with the recruiter, and it also gives you a sort of way to navigate right now a very, very hot job market.
Yeah, brilliant advice. And the final question, what's your top tips for interviews?
Top 10, if you're giving the interview?
If you're being interviewed, if you're going to go to an interview.
Okay, number one is, first of all, do your prep. Do your prep. Second thing is ask clarifying questions. Sometimes, and I've found this myself when I interview people, they don't ask a clarifying question, and then they end up going off on a tangent and don't answer my question. So don't shy away from asking a few clarifying questions, and then towards the end, once you've answered your question, I answer the question, make a point of saying, hey, is there anything in this that you want me to dive into a little bit more? And a lot of the times the person who's interviewing will say, actually, can you dive into this? But give them the opportunity. Sort of give the high level answer, you know, go into as much detail as makes sense, but then also see if you can circle back and go into additional detail.
Perfect. Ghazal, you've been an incredible guest again. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hopefully we speak to you again very, very soon.
Look forward to it. Amazing as always. Great conversation. Thanks a million. See ya.